Hello everyone. I'm standing in 2 feet of snow in sneakers in a park because I thought to wear the hat, didn't think to wear the footwear, but I wanted the shot to look good. So, here we go. Today, I'm going to be talking about the bad reputation of the OSR. Now, there has been some chatter about this lately, and even though that might be clickbaity chatter, it is something that's been out in the air. So, I will easily explain this. I think there are 5 types of people who play or collect OSR games. Just by describing these groups, I think the truth of its bad reputation will become very clear. But of course, I will explain in depth. I said I could explain it easily, not quickly. Type 1, the dabbler. These are people who just like role-playing games in general and want to play or collect as wide a variety of games as they possibly can. So of course, every so often these people will wander into OSR spaces and play OSR games. There would be no animosity from these people towards the most popular games in the industry or newer games because, hey, they play those too. And now I got kids staring at me from the other side. Anyway, the dabbler group has no inherent tendency towards any particular demographic category or political beliefs. They're going to, they're going to be the same as the gaming player base as a whole. Type 2, the preferer, yes. These are people who have decided that of all the possible games to play out there, they simply prefer OSR games for whatever reason having to do with the games themselves. It's not nostalgia, it's not an agenda, not social conditions, it's just a system preference. These people won't be into newer games simply because they don't like the games themselves. And again, the preferers have no inherent tendency towards any particular demographic category or political beliefs different than the overall gaming scene. Type 3, the nostalgists. This group doesn't like role-playing games as a whole. They just like one primary game. Maybe a few more from the same time period that their main game came out in. They like the system, the aesthetics, the tropes. They probably grew up playing this game, and they're not really interested in learning or playing any other games or giving a shit about new editions of their favorite game. And lucky them, the OSR movement is built on their preferred game, bringing in a whole new group of players and providing a vast selection of new products that work perfectly well with their old game. Of course, this group isn't going to give the first shit about the most popular or the newer games in the industry. This group is going to, it's going to trend much older than average. I mean, people whose gaming youth happened, between 1974 and 1986 are certainly no longer gaming youth. And they will heavily skew white and male because of what gamer demographics were back in the day. I don't think the nostalgists have any particular political tendencies as a group. This is just conjecture and personal observation. I think they're even more all over the place than the general gaming audience. Type 4, the true reactionaries. Unlike the varied group of people who might be nostalgic for just a specific old pastime of theirs, there are people whose entire worldview is opposed to the way things are now. This isn't just people not updating their views over time. There are younger people who have idealized versions of what the 80s or the 50s or whatever were really like, and they want things in general to be like that. And as part of that, of course they're going to also prefer games the way they used to be and not the way they are. Or to pull it another way, you know how critics pull the argument of, Well, if you like this 1974 version of a thing more than the right now versions, then you must have a total 1974 mindset with social attitudes to match. In most cases, that's nonsense. For some people, that's absolutely true. This group is of course going to skew hard right, and that's pretty much part and parcel of what it means to be right-wing. Demographically, they'll skew heavily white and male, but holy shit. When a woman or a member of a minority group appears in this category, they tend to be even more vociferous about their views. It's obnoxious. Type 5, the contrarian. These are people who pretty much don't fit in anywhere. They don't go along to get along, they don't give two shits about what's popular, they don't agree with any number of consensus views. Of course they don't care about or like the leading gaming brands. Of course they're going to be drawn to a corner of gaming that's completely decentralized and features user-generated products. Of course they're going to be drawn to games with looser rules, especially when that corner of gaming has no strong ideological consensus. Contrarians, for some reason, seem to be largely white as far as I can tell, and while they're going to tend to have strong political opinions, they won't map neatly or at all onto existing active political blocs. So those are the types. And kids are staring at me. I thought everyone's always recording content anyhow. Fucking hell. Anyway. Bad reputations. So, now that we've established the types of gamers that are attracted to the OSR, how does this mix create a bad reputation? Well, the OSR is going to be unique in that it will attract and maintain clusters of nostalgists, true reactionaries, and contrarians that many other gaming communities, or gaming populations, however you want to say that, they'll attract these groups that others won't. I mean, yeah, for something like D&D 5th edition, there might be clusters of these people, but they'll be such a small part of the overall player base that they're not as noticeable. But in the OSR, you can see these clumps, and they're pretty prominent. So that's a volatile mix of people who aren't going to be on board with any sort of consensus views of how things should be in the current moment. I mean, there might be nostalgists into RuneQuest or Traveler or what have you, but all of those properties are still owned and supported by specific companies. There are RuneQuest and basic role-playing BRP variants to be sure, but people aren't developing dozens and hundreds of new BRP games on their own with support and expectations of cross-compatibility. Nostalgists engaging with newer product and active communities are going to be glued to Chaosium, I think, for the most part, for, RuneQuest. Traveler doesn't have the same support for grassroots commercial publishing to the same scale the OSR does, and certainly not every Tom, Dick, and Harry are making their own Traveler remix brands. I mean, the OSR is basically all about pre-Unearthed Arcana era Dungeons & Dragons, with an environment that encourages and rewards making your own version of the game and commercial supplementary material, which has resulted in hundreds of independent entities all advertising and promoting their wares, and that promotion has a larger cumulative effect, and thus larger awareness of the OSR. And plus, all this stuff is 100% compatible with the game, just by virtue of the market share back in the day, that nostalgists prefer. They can continue on like no time has passed when it comes to their gaming. And all of this works commercially because the company that owns the trademark of Dungeons & Dragons, you notice the OSR games, none of them call themselves Dungeons & Dragons, the company that owns that trademark has completely abandoned classic versions of the game. They even disclaimer the digital versions of the old stuff that they sell about how old and out of date it is, And they haven't published anything resembling the classic versions of the game for a quarter of a century now. But because they're old and not keeping up with gaming trends or the ever-changing pool of newer gamers, nostalgists will be subject to all of the okay boomerisms that will make them seem totally uncool in the eyes of those that are the demographic marketing targets of the industry marketing leaders. And that's going to create some friction. I mean, I wonder if Forge nostalgists are on their way, considering that site's heyday was 20 years ago or more at this point. So, and then true reactionaries aren't going to have a good time in many gaming communities. I mean, indie and story game circles skew heavily progressive, and every market leader in the tabletop RPG field utterly rejects reactionary views in politics. But with the older fan base of OSR games and a lack of central ownership, reactionaries can slip right in and often not even be detected as being distinctly reactionary for quite some time, because, I mean, the original remit of the OSR is basically gaming the way it used to be and the way you like it. So, while owners of individual OSR forums or Discord servers or Facebook groups or whatever are free to ban whatever people or ideas that they like, there's nothing to stop these reactionary people or anyone else that gets excluded from forming their own online discussion groups, online communities, and enjoying and promoting and hawking the same games that everyone else is in the OSR. You can't kick anyone out of the OSR because there's nobody in charge of the OSR. Hell, I bet half the people watching this strongly disagree with my basic definition of what the OSR even is. Which makes the OSR perfect for the contrarians. There are so many different perspectives on what the OSR is, so many different approaches to creating material for it, not being attached to the output of any of the industry, market leaders. And with the OSR being the home of such a motley crew of creators and players, there are, in most cases, no strong consensus for contrarians to rub up against. Unlike, say, the indie story game scene, I mean, what is the current label for that anyway? But, unlike that scene that has such a strong ideological consensus, that contrarians are largely just going to nope right out of there. And so then, with this eclectic mix of people all stewing about around the games labeled OSR, when controversy strikes, when attitudes about what good gaming practices are shifts, when attitudes about what good gaming communities are shifts, there are enough different and conflicting groups within the OSR that a significant amount of people there will simply shrug their shoulders or loudly tell people to fuck off and then continue as they were. And those that think there should be real solidarity in the gaming community, that there should be a common vision of the industry to march towards, or even those that think there should be a strong sense of a gaming community in the first place, they're not going to be favorable to this mass of people who for different reasons just aren't going to be on board. It is important to remember that the very core of the OSR is a rejection of the fear of seeming out of date, a rejection of current consensus, a rejection of the idea that newer is better, a rejection of the idea that all change is progress, a rejection of the very idea of consensus. If you are into OSR games, you are at least, in a tiny, tiny way, rejecting modernity. And for some people, it's not just in a tiny way. The OSR came together at the height of Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, by far the most successful Dungeons & Dragons to that point, that it was swallowing up the entire industry. Everyone, every company, was in a rush to release D20 variations of their own properties. But there were a group of people who just said, no, what you're doing with this game, it's complete ass. It was a total rejection of the gaming community at large, and a complete rejection of how Dungeons & Dragons had evolved. While I was a witness to the genesis of the OSR, I wasn't part of the genesis of the OSR. I jumped on soon after, though, because, the old D&D is my home native system, so... but I certainly was around for the industry and greater community backlash against the very concept of an old school renaissance. And the backlash was, at times, fucking fierce. So of course the OSR is going to be difficult and have a bad reputation, with all the conflicting motivations for even being part of the OSR. So many of us don't get along with each other within this space. Not at all. And that's before we even get to the aesthetic tastes. Someone liking a classic 70s vibe. Which 70s vibe? Sword and sorcery? Epic quest Tolkien worship? Even that, there's divisions. But, you know, someone liking a classic 70s vibe might not get along so well with Lamentations of the Flame Princess style hyper horror. And neither approach is going to sit very well with someone who has current socially conscious mainstream media tastes. But the OSR includes people with all these motivations for being here, and it includes all these different tastes and much more besides. If we can't even get our house in any sort of unified order, why would you expect any better outcomes when dealing outside the OSR? And then, with all this, of course, some people are going to look at the OSR and think it's a trash fire from hell and want nothing to do with it. They're going to go do something else. As well, they fucking should. I mean, please go bother someone else. Please go find something you actually like. But the people who think that the OSR should change, that it should adopt some standard or another that it currently does not, what exactly is that mechanism for change then? What is the mechanism for adopting this standard that you think we should all have? Who implements it? Who enforces it? It doesn't exist on an OSR level. It just doesn't. I mean, again, the OSR was created by people who looked at change, who looked at the standards as they existed at the time, and said, nah, we're good. So, good luck with all that. And, you know, personally, I think that all of this is not a problem to be solved. It's just a reality to be acknowledged. Actually, I think it's a feature and not a bug of the OSR. Because no matter your tastes, no matter your dysfunction, no matter your demographic category, no matter your philosophy, if you like playing with this category of game mechanics, there is a place for you in the OSR. You won't be welcomed, but nobody can stop you from staking a claim and cultivating your own little patch of your own fucking ideas under the umbrella of the OSR and making of that whatever you can. And you know what? There ain't nothing more truly inclusive than that.